I am Ailsa Kepi, and I'm your host for this morning. And I'm here to talk about something that has been near and dear to my heart and my healing process. And this is understanding dissociation as both a positive and a negative in this journey of integration and holism that I've been on for many years now. So I wanted to kind of talk about dissociation and how it works as a result of trauma, and also potentially how it's actually wired into many of us, if not all of us, as human beings, as a responsive way to deal with the environment. So without further ado, if you want to find out more about me, working with me, check out my website, ailsakepi.com or pleasureforhealth.com. I'm a somatic coach, a body worker, and I work with particularly women, but also anyone that's had a dissociative experience in your body, really, something that has unintegrated you as a whole person and has become impactful in your life in a way that you would like to change. So my method of working with people is through the soma, through the body, through somatic integration. But I'm understanding more and more about how the mind and the body and the spirit, the soul, actually have a big part to play, especially when we are talking about trauma. And this could be big T trauma or little t trauma. It could be ongoing trauma that you've had. It could be an emotionally abusive relationship that you've been through. These are all ways that overwhelm our system or could overwhelm our system. And so the response to what's happening in the world, the response to what we're experiencing is really more of interest, I think, than what actually happens. There are many people that can have an experience that would be overwhelming to us but isn't overwhelming to their system, and so they don't experience like a post-traumatic stress disorder or anything like that because they're able to integrate that experience. But some of us are less able to deal with overwhelming experiences or even just ongoing abuse or patterns, things that are too stimulating for us to integrate. So in that case, we have to come up with coping strategies for how to just survive, how to just be in the world with all of these overwhelming kind of stimuli. And for many people that are now, we're coming more into understanding things like autism and ADHD and different things like that. We're noticing that sensory stimulation overload can be can lead to similar things as maybe emotional overload maybe as well, right? So we could have many experiences of overloading our system. Perhaps Christmas holidays are overloading to your system. Perhaps being around your family members or a strong energy center could be overloading to your system. I've been to certain places like Sedona and Arizona, and the energy there just in the earth or however the vortex is could add to that sort of overstimulation. So I wanted to look at what is dissociation and how does it work for us and maybe against us in different ways so that we can have more of an empowered way of looking at ourselves and our responses. So typically dissociation is defined as a break in how you handle information. So we're getting all this informational input and we're not integrating it. It's not getting put together in the way that as humans we tend to put things together in storylines, in beliefs, in programs that, so that we can then process it. So we call, you might hear people talk about, I'm processing things. So there's a lot of information coming at us these days. So processing it is a whole thing. So dissociation is that we're getting these scattered inputs. We might be getting word information, we're getting emotional information, we're getting, climate information, we're getting, sensory stimulation, and all of these things aren't getting integrated. And so we keep them all dissociated, i.e. they're all separate memories or separate ways of kind of entering and getting encoded in our brain or our mind. So when someone has a dissociation from something, they might remember words that were said, but they can't put that together with how they felt about the words, And on a very mild level, I've been teaching a writing and somatics course, which some of you may have heard about. It's been really interesting to work with women writing their experiences because, often when we get to a part we're writing about that was overloaded, that was triggered, we were overloaded in that moment, the writing becomes very like wooden, very stilted. And so, the person sort of just writes, and then this happened, and then that happened, and then and it's sort of void of any of the other richness of being a human, right? Like there's no feeling, there's no awareness of what was happening around. So often in our writing, because we can do whatever we want with our writing, make a story up, we can often imagine the feeling and the environmental things and the sounds and the sensory stimuli back into the story. And I did this myself when I was writing my memoir. I often, actually had a lot of places where I dissociated and it was hard to put them together. And so I kind of imagined if I was a character going through that, walking down the road and seeing an accident or something, if I was doing that, what would I feel? What would I think? What would be happening around me? And make it up. And sometimes that's as helpful as, actually having an integrated memory to start with. So if you dissociate a lot, you might miss what's happening in the outside world. You kind of go into your own other place, right? Kind of a daydream state might be a mild form of dissociation. It might also be really helpful in a sense of being able to focus, or just, if you're on a bus and you've got a 4-hour bus ride and you can daydream and, go somewhere else and work out maybe your thesis for your master's degree or something in your head. I mean, that's a pretty awesome way to deal with things, rather than being, if you don't want to be present in that bus for 4 hours, noticing the guy next to you sneezing and the next person, moving around and somebody playing annoying music, like maybe you don't want to be present. And so this is, one interesting fact of dissociation is that, some of us do it just in a way to kind of make it through life, right? Or to kind of go do other things in other realms. So I've also found that dissociation can give us an amazing gift, an amazing kind of intuitive gift and healing gift with being able to just focus on something that we choose to focus on. So when dissociation becomes kind of a dysfunctional maybe is when we don't have that control of it, when we're just not able to be present and we're just kind of transported somewhere else, or we're cut off from, we kind of get a derealization sort of effect, like we're not able to be in real life right now, like we're somewhere else and we can't actually keep ourselves present. Maybe that's something that we wouldn't choose to have happen to us because we'd like to be present. So, it could be this mental escape when physical presence can't escape. And this comes back to, in many cases, dissociation is something we often learn as a child. So many, people I talk to have had childhood experiences of abuse or neglect or emotional trauma since they were a child. And so dissociation is a way to deal with that when you can't actually leave. If you're 4 or 5 years old or however, you can't necessarily physically get out of that traumatic space. And so you learn to mentally escape. And so dissociation can be a huge survival response for us if we have those kinds of experiences in our past. And so often if we were growing up and things were chronically overwhelming, and varying degrees of trauma happening, we could find that we end up learning how to dissociate most of the time. And that could end up being a state where we spend a lot of our time. We're actually not able to be fully present in the moment that often. And so, that, like I said, it's not necessarily a bad thing unless what you're hoping for is a present moment experience, in which case you want to know how, have choice about that. It would be nice to have choice about when you stay present. It would be nice to have choice around staying present in an intimate relationship. this is where I end up working with a lot of people, is, it doesn't maybe even, they don't even notice until all of a sudden they want to be in a relationship with someone and really feel loved and be loved and find that ecstasy of physical connection or emotional connection, and they don't know how to start. They don't know how to stay present and experience those type of big feelings of physical excitement or emotional connection. Those are big feelings. And so if our learned pattern from childhood perhaps has been dissociating to cope with overwhelming feelings, and now you're in a relationship where you want to have, like many of us might describe sexual ecstasy or something like that, having an orgasm, as an overwhelming body experience or an overwhelming emotional experience. And if you want to experience that and you can't stay present, it's going to be pretty difficult. So that's maybe when some people start saying, hey, well, maybe I'd like to learn how to stay present and to be aware and to move through and to be in relationship with someone so that I'm not just checking out and dissociating whenever big feelings are coming up. Because relationships are about big feelings. They have to actually bring that up for most of us. And if they don't, we may find that we always feel lonely or disconnected or unable to kind of be loved or be, loving. We try and it feels like we're trying to reach through, this kind of impenetrable glass box, right, towards this other person. So these are some of the reasons why we might decide that, dissociation might have worked in many cases, and we'd like to know how to work with our body in other ways and stay present. But anyway, dissociation, just coming back to that, is a natural response to trauma, I think, in most people. And it's a very clever response. It is a very intelligent response. I tell so many people I talk to, this was an intelligent way of stopping you from being completely overwhelmed and fragmented and, maybe perhaps completely destroyed and end up in an asylum because of what you may have been through. And so learning how to dissociate was a way that you kept yourself somewhat alive and somewhat whole and able to function. So it's a natural response. It can be also like a way we choose to calm down from things. Like even some cultural or religious rituals are based on kind of dissociating. Like, you might even meditate and people go, we're trying to feel part of the entire world, the oneness of everything. Let's say that's a goal of your meditation. I mean, you could say that's depersonalization if you put it in trauma speak, right? So you're actually becoming one with everything and there is no you and them, there's just a oneness. Well, that could be described as a somewhat of a dissociative disorder state, but we might choose to do that because it's calming, because it helps us be involved in the larger picture of connection of humans. Taking psychedelics could be a similar thing, right? You get this kind of, I'm one with everything, or I've gone somewhere else and experienced something, and I bring back wisdom to have in my body. So I think a lot of this is that what we do with this coping strategy after we've learned it. Do we just let it run amok in our lives and whenever it wants to and just dissociate any old time? Or do we start to work with it and say, hey, I have this great ability to dissociate when I need to. If I need to run out, run after my kid who's about to go into the river and there's a waterfall over there, like I need to dissociate from the pain I might have in my arthritic knees and go get my kid, right? So there's some dissociation from physical pain that way too. That would be helpful. Like we need to do something. So really it's this really nuanced thing that, some people, obviously there's a spectrum. And when you get all the way to what might be classified as a dissociative disorder, whether you've been diagnosed with that, it's all on a spectrum. And, we can kind of work with dialing our way back to a place where we feel that we have some empowerment, some control for ourselves, and we're kind of at a place where we can, live. And so this might, if you have been diagnosed with something like schizophrenia or multiple personality disorder, dissociative identity disorder, some of these more radical manifestations of dissociation, You may need a multi-range, sort of multifaceted approach. Perhaps you have a psychiatrist and you are on medication and you're doing other things. That doesn't take away from the fact that doing some deeper self-awareness work or some somatic integration work wouldn't also be helpful. And so I think that's where I come from as a somatic coach is, we may not be able to address everything from this place, but along with your other caregivers, along with your other ways of, dealing with some of these more extreme affects, then we could, we can help to integrate and maybe learn some new ways of, I can feel what's going on in my body, and I can take a moment and understand that this isn't just something that's going to freak me out. Maybe I can actually say, oh yeah, I'm feeling a little numb in my fingers, and I know that might be due to the fact that I'm really stressed out right now, or that somebody has just said something to me that has reminded me of a past trauma. And now I'm aware that I don't need to lash out. I don't need to, punch them in the face or run away or do what might be coming to me. I could just be like, oh, this is reminding me of a previous thing. I can stay present because this person perhaps isn't dangerous to me right now. So, there's ways that we can start working with understanding what our body is telling us in here as well. So dissociation can become a dissociative disorder if your environment's no longer traumatic, but then if you act as if it is, and that you dissociate anyway to protect yourself, but it's only based on the past experience. And this is where some psychology, some coaching, some somatic awareness, some body work, can really help you differentiate between what is dangerous right now in the present moment, what perhaps was dangerous to you as a 2-year-old or dangerous to you in the past, and that you may not be in that place now, even though your body may be responding to that. It's interesting, in some of the research they're showing that within dissociation, there's an increase to the blood to the back of your brain, like back here, which is your brain stem, your kind of intuitive brain, the habitual, the brain that just responds quickly, whereas a decrease in blood to the frontal cortex, which is maybe where we think and reason and work stuff out. So some of the connections that we start making in therapy would be to help us notice what's happening and notice that we've gone into a fear response potentially, and then really bring that into a frontal cortex kind of communication. So we can put words to it. We can put understanding of time and space. We can put it together with something that would use our frontal cortex a little bit more and sort of integrate these parts of our brain. So that, dissociation could also mean this dissociation and lack of communication between parts of our brain. And it's shown that with fear, our brain actually dissociates itself. It actually closes down into small little parts of our brain, which all act independently of each other, and therefore we come across as kind of crazy or disjointed, like our responses don't make sense because we're not actually integrating, we're dissociating. And it's interesting that in the brain that happens. And I'm just, as a side note, when we have fear in cultures, in our societies, we tend to gravitate and move into these isolated communities as well. We tend to hunker down with our people. And, it's interesting that is a fear response that not only happens in communities, it happens in our own brains. So it's interesting to kind of notice the as above, so below kind of thing. And it gives us, a sense that, well, we're dealing with fear. So what are we, what's the fear about, and how can we work on that together? So the relational trauma piece potentially is one of the biggest ways that dissociation becomes a coping strategy, because relational trauma is confusing. It's I love this person, but they're also hurting me. And so that in and of itself can lead to an overwhelmingly confusing place. I don't know what to do. I can't fight you, I can't kill you, I can't hate you completely because you're also my lover or my mother or my caregiver or, really important person to me. So these kinds of overwhelming, like, I don't know, I can't figure out what to do would lead to things like dissociating because we just can't figure it out. So I guess one other thing I wanted to, in some of the research that I was doing recently, that there's a new subtype of PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, that actually is related to dissociation. So it's a dissociative subtype of PTSD where this would actually be the way that you coped. And it might have to do with, compartmentalizing trauma. And so dissociation, is even being recognized as a way of dealing with long-term stress, particularly chronic long-term stress. And, one of the things that comes up, and the reason I find this topic so interesting as well, is it overlaps a number of my areas of specialization. So when I work with, sexual education and pelvic pain, or, because I'm a body worker as well, working with chronic pain, the putting of our emotional overload and our dissociation of being able to maybe process all this information, all this stuff that's coming in, often it comes out as a body pain. And, this body pain may have no physical reason for being there, except that there was, traumatic abuse or sexual abuse or something as, in your life. And then it comes out as a body symptom. And so dealing with it in the typical medical way of, like, you have a urinary tract infection, let's say, we'll treat the infection, but it's actually, I've seen multiple women with many urinary tract infections or pelvic pain that actually have way more to do with emotional abuse or physical sexual abuse than it does anything to do with the fact that, they keep getting bacteria. Like, that's kind of the manifestation of the deeper levels. And so this kind of putting something out in a different way. So we've had emotional trauma, now we're having a body pain, is that sort of dissociation in a different sense as well. Like, we're not having emotional pain and then dealing with it, on the same plane. We're kind of dissociating, and then our body tends to, manifest something like that. So many women, it's starting to be researched quite a bit now about pelvic pain, chronic pelvic pain. And this could lead to all sorts of things like frigidity, if you want to call it that, or sexual, an incapacity to orgasm, or all of these things that, come up for women in intimate relationship, where they can't actually connect with their own body or with another person. Is perhaps this comes from this kind of dissociation that they may have learned to do for many, many years. And so their body is trying to speak to them in a different language. And so that's part of the way that I might help people move towards that as well. So really there's such an interesting kind of overlap between all these ways of dealing. And so, when we look at a diagnosis of a dissociative disorder or PTSD or something like that, it may have components of dissociation in there. And within that, we can look at where do we want to get to? What do we want to experience? Do we want to keep some of that dissociative stuff present because it's actually helping us survive? Or do we want to learn how to slowly bring parts of those memories, those disjointed memories, into a kind of wholeness that we can then, choose to set aside at some point potentially, or, transform through. So again, like I said, I've found a number of ways to work very successfully with people on this type of integration. And it does include things like using the body and the mind and also story. So I haven't really touched too much on that, maybe something for another video. But many times when we haven't been able to, process this type of fragmentation, this type of fragmented memories, is often because we didn't have, as a child, we didn't have a caregiver or a parent or an adult who was able to kind of be okay with all the big feelings and help us to hold that together. And so we kind of had to dissociate there, and there was no one to help us process it. And I've actually read about, and experienced in my own self, and a way of coping with that we create almost like a protector, an imaginary friend, an angel, a guide, a mentor. It might be kind of this cross between protector and perpetrator in your own mind, can lead to what might have been, close to schizophrenia or even something like that. Although I would say, it doesn't always have to go that far. You might just have potentially like this kind of figure or being in your mind that helps you, that says you're okay, and we're going to get through this, and I'm going to protect you. But then when you get into a new relationship, it's like, oh, we got to be careful of this. Don't trust anybody. Don't get close to this person. So this same figure is acting as both a friend and an enemy. And this is brought forward in many, many fairy tales and myths. So it's not new. Something like, the one with the hair. I'm like forgetting the name of it. Rapunzel. The story of Rapunzel and her hair that she lets down, and the witch that, locks her in the tower, and, but doesn't, we kind of gloss over the first part of the story in that this witch took this baby as a young baby and raised her for the first 10 or 12 years of her life. So obviously wasn't, so horrible looking after her that she didn't survive, right? So fed her, clothed her, whatever. It was only when, Rapunzel was about to become a woman, was about to become more of her own person, that the witch had to imprison her in a tower and then stop her from meeting the outside world, because that would be too scary. You can see how this, might become a figure in your own imagination of, I'm going to protect you. But now you've come to this place where you want to experience more. Oh no, we're not going to let you do that. And so you end up having this fight within your own psyche. And that's a little bit beyond maybe what we're talking about here, but it goes together in the sense of how our mind really helps us survive much of the trauma and horrible experiences. Like, people have had truly horrific experiences, or just ongoing minor neglect that can lead to that same kind of dissociation. I think in my case was possibly just a disconnect between my mother and I. Like, we didn't have the same way of connecting. I think she was possibly a little bit on the autistic spectrum, so she finds it difficult to connect. And my way of connecting is very body oriented, kinesthetic, and so we just didn't connect. And that in and of itself could be traumatic enough to a young baby, to a young person, that you would feel like you were constantly being rejected, even though there was no malice there, I don't believe, or anything like that. So it could be on that whole spectrum of abuse or trauma, and you can still develop some of these same ways of coping. So understanding it is one sense, and bringing it into the body and really noticing how does that play out for you is the work of integrating that. So now we can hold ourselves through those big feelings when we start feeling that we're falling in love. This is a loss of control, that we can still hold ourselves together, that we can still be a whole person going into that relationship, rather than kind of losing parts of ourselves in there. So this was a lot all in one thing. As you can tell, it's one of my favorite sort of topics to get into the nitty-gritty of how it comes out for you. I would say for every single person, it looks kind of different. So one of the best ways I love working with women particularly is to look at how it manifests for you. How does it show up in your life? And let's kind of dig around in that. How does it feel in your body? How does it seem? What are your stories? What are your myths that you live by? And, do you want to change or rewrite any of them? And we can definitely help you do that. So Anyone wanting to look into more of my work, please do check out ailsakeppie.com, ailsakeppie.com. That'll get you to my other websites, my retreat center here, or my somatic coaching website as well. I very much look forward to having more connection with you. Those of you in my Facebook group, please comment on the video. Let me know how you liked it, what resonated for you, what's calling for you, how has dissociation worked for you or not worked for you, or what do you feel about all the things I've said? I'd love to hear about it in the comments, and we'll talk to you soon.